Hello and welcome to My Lair. I am your host, Rosinda, and I'm joined with my co-host, Manoa. You're listening to this only on Radio Pasifik, 89.4 FM, Love Your Culture. And today we have a very special guest by the name of Dr. Annie Crookes.
Yay! Hi!
Yes! So Annie, how may I address you?
Annie's fine.
All right. I already accidentally slipped to Annie anyway.
No, it's fine. I'll answer to most things.
Yeah, all right. So Annie, would you like to tell us a bit about what you do here in USP?
Yeah, so I'm the discipline coordinator for the psychology programs, which is based in the School of Social Sciences, Law and Social Sciences. Right. And then I teach a mix of courses. I teach like the basic intro psych course for the first years. And then I do a lot of the postgraduate courses in counseling and mental health. Wow. And then I've been doing kind of various research projects around student health and well-being and mental health, particularly in Fiji and mental health services and things like that.
Wow, okay,
Awesome.
right. So it seems like your field is generally what people think of when they think about psychology. When they think about psychology as therapy, counseling, someone journaling your thoughts and then writing it down for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think there's always two things we always say to students, when they join psychology, or you say to someone, "Oh, I'm a psych student," they think you're a mind reader.
Yeah.
So
Right. I will say that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I guess the other side is absolutely, sort of mental health and counseling. But that doesn't mean it's like Freud, where you've got someone lying on a couch and you're asking them about their parents. It's very scientific and it's very much about like researching these issues. So yeah,
There's a science in the social science.
yeah, absolutely.
So would you like to tell us about what your specialty is in psychology?
I mean, I've kind of just been doing like a jack of all trades, I guess. I've been in Fiji about 3 years now, and I moved here from Dubai. And in Dubai, my role was the similar role of running programs and setting up the degrees. So I was just teaching a little bit of everything. So expertise, I guess, would be like the mental health side and things like that. But it's just kind of a little bit of everything.
Wow, a jack of all trades. So would you like to tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming a professor in psychology?
Yeah. So I guess this is maybe something that students can relate to. I did my bachelor's degree and didn't have a clue what I wanted to do in life at all.
So relatable right there.
And then I kind of knew like the things that I was passionate about were not having to wear a suit to work, never wearing high heels or makeup. And so that kind of narrowed down, law and some of those more business-related things.
a lot of opportunities.
Yeah, so I actually went this is very random. After my first degree, I went and worked in the wine trade for a year.
Wow.
Which was a nice kind of thing to do. And it was a very kind of physical job, which was nice. And then decided I did actually want to go back and keep learning. So kind of discovered that my passion was kind of more in the sort of research and academia side and psychology, and trying to do something that would sort of help the mental health in the future. So I went back and did my PhD, and then was lucky enough to get a lectureship straight from that. So I just stayed at uni and never left, basically.
That sounds like a dream, honestly. So your specialty is a little bit of everything. But prior to our podcast, we were talking a little bit how you have a little bit of expertise in substance abuse and adolescents. So would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I did do after my PhD, I went back a few years later and did a master's degree, and that was in international addiction studies. And it was a kind of one of those degrees that you take kind of by distance, and it's run by 3 universities, so Adelaide University and King's College in London and a university in the States. So we were really talking about substance abuse and policies around addiction and dependence, particularly in young people. And I did my thesis for that master's. I was based in Dubai at the time, so I did it on substance use among young people, particularly sort of alcohol. Obviously, in a Muslim country, drug use is a very sensitive topic, as it is in many places. Yeah. So I was very interested in alcohol, but also they had a form of tobacco, a sort of local form of tobacco. So we were kind of very interested in how prevalent that is. So I kind of was interested in. I went into lots of different high schools and kind of just asked about what they do.
Wow. Just wanted to ask, because you did mention that you moved from Dubai to Fiji, right? when that happened, did you have any prior expectations of what you might expect in Fiji, or like did you, considering the field that you're in, did you, anticipate that you'll come across some interesting things that you haven't experienced yet, or see some of the cases in psychology that perhaps you may have never come across?
I think I had no idea what I was coming to. I actually didn't realize that Nandi was not the main city and flew to the wrong place. I recognize that this would be an extremely different way of living to what people in Dubai live by, and different culture. And so I understood it would be very different and that would be very interesting, but I certainly hadn't anticipated a lot of the ups and downs that come and the challenges of being of living in the Pacific, not just for myself, but Pacific populations and the level of trauma and mental health challenges that people here face. I hadn't understood kind of any of that, and it's been a real eye opener. And I think I'm also kind of thankful because I hadn't really understood the level of colonization and decolonization and the impacts of that in terms of historic trauma. So I'm kind of glad that I'm getting to understand a lot more about what affects Indigenous populations.
That's amazing. Amazing. So you were talking a little bit about that. I'd love to hear more. I'm sure listeners would love to hear more as well.
Definitely.
What was it like having to move from... I'm sorry if I may ask first, which part of the world are you from?
I'm from London, from England originally.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So right in the city or somewhere around? I'm in the city enough that I'm on the underground system. I'm not out in the suburbs. Right. So moving from London to Dubai to Fiji, how many culture shocks have you had?
Yeah, well, and also we lived in the States when I was a kid, and Bermuda, and so I've lived on an island before, which is something. The same. I went to Dubai without having any idea what it was going to be like. But I think, all the places that I've lived previously, although they are sort of different geographically and sort of very kind of different. Actually, they're all very westernized. Dubai and the UAE is an Arab and Muslim country, but Dubai is extremely westernized.
Right.
And so nothing's been that different. And Fiji's really the first experience of a very different way of living to what I'm and a different mindset culturally to what is what I'm used to being as an English person kind of thing. So
I wanted to pick up on that. It's really interesting how you mentioned that you've been to Bermuda, you've been to USA, Dubai, and then to Fiji, and being from London. I just wanted to ask, when you were conducting your studies, when you were interested, in psychology and mental health, did you see any similarities in patterns or like differences between these countries that you visited?
In terms of research or in terms of teaching students?
In terms of research, definitely.
Of course there are differences. As I say, culture massively impacts the way you understand the world and the way you respond to things in the environment and your childhood experiences and things like that. And so that's kind of a given. But at the same time, young people are young people the world over. I think that's kind of, particularly when I've been looking at things like substance use and sort of mental health, issues. A lot of these things are the same. You have different legal and religious values and that influences and sort of restricts what's available and what's acceptable. But at the same time, young people want to experience things, they want to experience life, and that's going to come out one way or another. And I think it's the same with mental health, sort of mental illness and things that, there may be different causes, different specific life events that lead to depression, anxiety, even things like psychosis and bipolar and some of the more significant illnesses. But so they might present differently, but they still exist in all the different countries. Right. So it's still universal to some level.
Humans are still humans.
Very much.
Yeah.
Humans are humans.
We're still humans.
So since we're talking about patterns and trends and we're talking about substance abuse, have you noticed anything from the perspective of a psychologist, researcher, any similarities and differences in substance abuse in adolescents specifically? Does that make sense? Sort of globally, we know, alcohol and tobacco and marijuana are the most studied for college students and adolescents, and so assumes to be the most prevalent kind of things to take. And that's going to be the same kind of wherever you are. So there may be a lot more restrictions about what's available, but
alcohol and tobacco are probably still going to be more available than hard drugs in most countries. Even if they themselves are illegal, it's still more available and to some extent more socially acceptable. So we know, when we look at young people, alcohol is a problem. I think what's also been kind of interesting, as well as culture, is generational shifts. So the other big thing we're seeing at the moment, again, globally for the moment, I'll talk about the Pacific in a second. But there's been a massive drop in alcohol, tobacco, and some of the sort of party drugs globally compared to some of our generations, the older generations. And I think that says a lot about changes generation. So the young, the sort of post-millennials, Gen Zs, they're kind of much more interested in their health. They're much more interested they're much more educated about self-care. Potentially there is, again, globally, maybe not necessarily locally, more availability of support and understanding about how to deal with distress. As much as there are issues with stress caused by things like social media, there is just there's kind of swings and roundabouts about that. So I think that things like tobacco particularly, there's a huge drop in tobacco use. As a shift as an attitude that it's not cool anymore, like it was when I was a kid. And similarly, alcohol kind of is moving in that direction as well. So that's kind of something we're seeing generationally, that there's kind of a shift. But of course, there might be a shift in terms of other drugs that weren't around when I was a kid that are now around. So certainly the synthetic high drugs, like the spice and some of these ones.
Oh, yeah, spike, yeah.
I don't know anything about whether that's available in the Pacific, but certainly globally, there's obviously that's going to be something that exists now and is sort of relatively perhaps common now than it wouldn't have been for the older generations.
Right. And I feel like that's also because I know for my generation, we are the Gen Z generation is definitely the first to not remember a time without the internet. Yeah. Would you say that the influx of information from social media has a role in this?
Absolutely. Yeah. So in lots of different ways, we know that social media is impacting mental health, in many negative ways, and things like body image, and that's kind of having, as well as substance kind of issues, body image issues, and eating disorders and things like that, and anxiety and social fear and all of that. So it's definitely impacting. There is also then going to be social media means that your role models and the people you identify with are a much broader category. So, to some extent, if, you might be in a situation where your peers aren't smoking, let's say you're a young person and your peers aren't smoking, but all of your favorite celebs or TikTokers or whatever are, smoking, then you have a wider range of potential negative peer influences. Right. But at the same time, most likely the influencers are very careful about what they're portraying in terms of wanting to look healthy and wanting to look positive. So you might actually have some positive, impact in terms of it not being so prevalent on social media for some of the substance use stuff. You don't necessarily see as much about celebrities falling out of nightclubs drunk, or TikTokers probably aren't. They're dancing, or I'm not on TikTok, but they're not doing, like, I'm assuming there's not a lot of sort of TikTok where it's just about them alcohol and drug taking.
Yeah. A lot of the TikTok is like the biggest drama that I've seen from TikTok. Something to do with just high school drama, honestly. So it is true where you say that there are good influences in social media. Very, very true. But I think that would also swing the opposite direction. And that probably might be why there's so many issues with body image and self-esteem, because they portray this really perfect image. Yeah. That's an interesting generational shift that you were saying. Speaking of which, drugs in the Pacific. Lately, there's been a big epidemic of ice in Fiji, and a few years back, it started in Tonga. What would you have to say from the perspective of a psychologist about this?
Yeah, so it's, methamphetamine is a big problem across the Pacific. We know that it's because, it's caused by sort of drug trafficking pathways from the American continent through to Australia. And so they're using the Pacific as a sort of hub where they can stop and help to traffic the drugs. And obviously to create a safe and secure place, you need to get people addicted in that hub. And then you have a market, while you're stopping off to change boats or whatever you're doing. So we know that it's here. The problem is it is such a sensitive topic that there is no systematic data on real drug use. And it's very difficult, obviously, to ask people, and it's very illegal, and people are very worried about, even on an anonymous survey, kind of admitting to anything, of course. So we have a lot of anecdotal evidence that it's growing, but we don't actually know on a population level or in terms of age groups or ethnic groups kind of who's involved. So that's kind of one issue, which means we just don't know very much about it. We have scare stories, but we don't have the sort of scientific data. But then the other side of it, I would say with a lot of with the hard drugs, is, people are taking drugs of that nature to cope with something else going on, whether that is an underlying chronic mental health issue or a current life trauma, poverty, all of those kind of things. And so we have to understand that people taking ice, they are victims of something. And so we can't just criminalize, or purely criminalize. We have to look at why they were taking that drug and what we need to do to support them and help them in order to be able to remove the drug. It simply isn't good enough to try and, as much, okay, of course we need to try and stop trafficking and all that kind of stuff. But you can't just say to people, don't do it. Because, and you can't just say to people, you're doing it because you're some evil, stupid person. You have to understand that for that person, without any other support mechanisms around, the small short-term relief from their psychological pain that this drug gave them is the only thing that they can think to do, and of course it has huge impacts in terms of it, continues to sort of ruin their life, and now they're spending money on that instead of food and all the rest of it. But at the beginning, they took it because they needed something and they didn't have any other options. So we have to kind of start thinking a little bit about that and trying to understand when we come across people who are using methamphetamine, trying to understand what the issues were and then setting up those support mechanisms.
I think that's a really important point that you touched on there, because a couple seconds ago you're talking about how globally there's been a gradual decline in alcohol use as well as hard drugs. But then when it comes to the Pacific, even though there's no scientific evidence, but there is anecdotal evidence and just basically word around the street that young people as well as adolescents and even adults who are taking ice, who are engaging in these activities, and thankfully, you did mention that people who take this generally are going through something, because even from my experience, I do have some friends who do engage in drugs, and for the most people that I see, most people that I know, it's because of what they're going through in their lives. Maybe they're going through hard times at home, traumatic relationships, there's some things that they've gone through that really affects them. Even if it's like 4 or 5 years back, it's still affecting them now. And just that little tiny relief, that little sensation is what they hold on to. And I did ask one of my friends, like, what significance does this give? And my friend did say that this tiny relief feels like a lifetime to them. Like it gives them the opportunity to detach from reality, to detach from the trauma. So, I just find it really interesting that you said that. And absolutely. And it's really, it's fantastic that when you had a friend who was taking it, actually you sort of said, well, why? Yeah. What does it do for you? Not in a judgmental way, but kind of what else is going on. That's a really important thing to show that you're trying to understand what's going on for them, not just trying to say, don't do it. Or but exactly that. And I think certainly, as I said in the beginning, the Pacific, it's a very challenging life that people live here. The amount of trauma is really, it's shocking how much people cope with and how much people have to sort of put up with here. And then, of course, post-COVID, we have all of the additional impacts of COVID and poverty and unemployment and those kind of things. So mental health is certainly rising. And as much as I sort of said among university students, there's maybe a drop in kind of the partying compared to some of our, we can certainly see the opiate epidemic in the States. There is a massive rise in the drugs that are helping you deal with pain and distress. These are two things that are happening at the same time.
And I'd just like to touch on, in the Pacific, I've noticed, my sister sent me this map, and basically it was a comparative map between cultures that tend to use shame and cultures that also have the highest rates of mental illness in their countries in adolescents. So I was just thinking, just what Manoa said with his friend. I also do have a few friends back home who was telling me about what it's like to have ice in the homeland, and my cousin was actually telling me like everyone knows that ice is very very that methamphetamine is very present in the community, but since it's such a small community, and since in the Pacific Island culture, we always have to have each other's backs. That's a really big reason as to why people don't fill out anonymous surveys, even if it's anonymous, because they understand that there's a reason why drug dealers are selling drugs, because, they don't have an income. There's a reason why users are using these drugs, because they don't have another way of relief. So just a little tangent I went off there. But would you say that the substance abuse that you've seen in the Pacific is a little bit different from what's happening globally?
Well, again, it's hard to know that for sure because we don't have systematic data being collected in the same way. But so for the last couple of years, I've been doing a student health and well-being survey with USP students across the region, all the campuses. And so what I'm finding from that, and again, the issue of like people are not going to answer very sensitive questions, and particularly with it being USP, I don't want anything that's going to get back to my teachers or whatever, and of course it wouldn't. But so I can only ask basic things like have you ever drunk alcohol, or do you drink alcohol in this past month? And then the same this year, I asked about just marijuana and kind of have you ever taken marijuana?
I think a lot of students are really, really sort of shy, especially when it comes to authority figures. Anyone who's a teacher, anyone who's their manager. I've noticed in the Pacific we are very strict on the structure of a family, and so I think we sort of subconsciously apply that familial structure to like our workplace or school, where there's an authority figure and then everyone else follows. So that's very, very, and that might be the reason why they're not answering the surveys properly.
Absolutely. I can understand that. So what I'm sort of seeing, I'm not asking about ice or any of the sort of serious sort of drugs, but certainly with sort of alcohol and tobacco, it is relatively, compared to the student surveys coming out of the UK and the US, we are seeing relatively lower numbers. Wow. And I think that would also be, of course, because of the strong religious values that are around. So that, of course, is protective and the family's sort of values and being a sort of conservative societies across the Pacific. But among the people that do drink alcohol, binge drinking, which is actually this, college campuses and binge drinking are the same the world over. And it's like, and actually, as much as we're seeing lower overall, in my small sort of surveys, lower overall alcohol drinking, I'm still seeing that element of the people that drink, binge drink. Right. And binge drinking is defined as 5 or more drinks in a single kind of session. Wow. And so I wonder if part of that is a lack of education. So because it's a sensitive topic and because there are many sort of religious and cultural values saying, just don't do it, there's actually a lack of responsible versus hazardous drinking. Right, I mean, not if you can say drinking is ever responsible, but, but kind of what is okay and what is really putting you seriously at risk. And so there isn't that information going around that might be available to students in other countries, maybe. So that's kind of one thing. The other thing I noticed was I asked a little bit about, how many have you ever done marijuana? And it's, sort of 10% or whatever say yes. And then I said, okay, thinking of your friends and your peer groups, your classmates, what percentage of them do you estimate are on drugs?
You do that on the quiz.
Yes. Just to try and get at a slightly more maybe honest kind of response. So you don't do it, but how many from your observation, how many of your friends do you say do it? And then we're looking more at like 20, 25% as the average estimate. Of course, some people are like 100%.
Everyone does it.
But the average across the large survey is people roughly saying, about a fifth or a quarter of my classmates are probably taking drugs.
And so when you carry out these pieces of research, do you look at when they answer the first question, do you smoke marijuana? Or do you look at when they answer from the perspective of the peers? Because I understand in psychology, when you create qualitative questionnaires, you have to be careful in how you word it. So which piece of data do you take it from?
Yeah,
do you take your results?
I mean, you have to take sort of both. So obviously self-report is is more sort of valid because you are then just saying what yourself, but you then understand that is going to be bias, that's going to be honesty, that's going to be kind of people not feeling that they can say anything. And so in some ways you might look at the number of people that say, you have a response that is don't want to answer or no answer. And so you might sort of look at that and say, okay, well, if there's a large portion of that, probably the people saying no answer are saying it because they mean yes. Yeah. And so that's part of it. I mean, asking about friends is just an additional sort of thing to sort of try and get at what might be going on. So you would take, you just kind of take both of those with the pros and cons of both of those pieces of data.
Okay.
I just wanted to touch on a previous point you mentioned about the culture in the Pacific and how, there's this ongoing sort of taboo nature of the use of drugs. And even in your service, by the way, I think me and Rosinda, we fill out your surveys very religiously.
And whenever it says, please fill in disagree for this question, I go, disagree.
Yeah. But I just wanted to ask, since you've been working around this field and you did come here 3 years ago and, not knowing about colonization and just the general culture of the Pacific, this may be on a social policy level, but what are some of the probably some of the challenges, maybe opportunities that you can see culture or Pacific culture evolving to a point where we can rid us of this taboo thing and where people can just be, even if it's an anonymous survey, they can go, oh yeah, just complete honesty on that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like you say, it's removing it as a taboo. It's normalizing it, and it's sympathizing, and saying, look, even if you are binge drinking it again, even if you're only binge drinking, you're not on ice or whatever, it still probably means that you have some academic stress, you have distress, and the binge drinking, the big party night out at the weekend is a sense of relief for you, and that's why you're doing it. So it's kind of being able to sort of say, look, we're not going to judge you as an evil person if you come forward, and it certainly isn't going to have legal repercussions to just kind of reach out. So I think it is about that, and it is that sense of normalizing help seeking. So the big problem is that, like you said about shame, that people are not meant to come forward and seek help, and so alcohol use, and hazardous kind of use of alcohol or other substances is the mechanism that you do because you can't otherwise tell anyone what your problems are.
Yeah.
That's true.
So that's a huge issue. And one of the questions in the survey is about, have you ever covered up a mental health challenge specifically because of stigma? And it's like 80% of people say yes, at some point or another. I proactively, covered up what I was going through. And that's a huge problem. And I think what we really need to do is normalize talking about your emotions, normalize having emotions, normalize that.
Just laugh, cry, do what you want to do.
Exactly. That you don't have to be smiley, happy Fijians or smiley, happy Pacific people all the time. And that actually it's positive to experience negative things, to go through stress and to have to cope with the stress of workload and time management of your studies or whatever it is, coming through the other side of that makes you stronger, and we need to be sort of saying you need to experience the bad in order to kind of enjoy and have more of the good. So I think normalizing emotional experiences, normalizing talking about emotions, particularly for young men. And that's the same, that is the same the world over, but Pacific culture. And there are so many things that things about the culture, and we always come back to the idea of the Talanoa and the Carver sessions. But those are really powerful tools that if you could just use that to just say, okay, well, what's going on for you? Yeah. Because people feel safe talking in that environment. And at the moment, maybe they're just not being directed to talk about emotions, perhaps. And it's like you could easily use that as a really safe space for peers to talk to each other and check in on each other. So I think there's some really positive things about the very communal, strong kind of structure that in the familial structure that you have here. It is just removing that taboo so that people feel safe going to each other and saying, I'm going through something. I'm weak at the moment or whatever, whatever it is.
Yeah. And oh my gosh, it just slipped my mind. But you did talk a little bit about men and their emotions. Could we just talk about, gender differences and displaying emotions and things like that?
Yes.
Manoa,
yes. I think, where should I start? I think for men, and this is, the general narrative about the masculine men, that especially in the Pacific culture, there's a abundance of that in Pacific men, especially the Fijian men. What I've seen is this general feeling that you're a man, you shouldn't be crying. And even when I go on social media, I see, men just putting up their stories that they grew up with this sort of narrative that you can't cry. If you cry, then that means you're like a sissy, or like, a man's job is to go outside, do all the hard labor, go and work the cane fields. And, just to me, that's fine. It has its place, but we're trying to train boys to be human men. We don't want them to be robots, But the general trend that I've seen growing up until now, and by the way, I grew up in a single parent family. My mom and my two sisters. So all this masculine thing, I didn't witness it till I actually came outside of my house. I grew up with a lot of feminine energy. So. Which is, and I did share this with Rosie during one of our trips overseas. Just the difference in my upbringing compared with my other male friends in their upbringing, because for me, I was exposed to this so much of feminine energy that I'm able to express my emotions, but even at the same time, I know when to reserve it to for my own self-reflection, but I can also express it. So whenever I'm sad or whenever I'm frustrated, I would go to, if not my mom, I'd go to my two sisters and just tell them that this is what I'm going through. We talk through it, and then that's fine. Then we everything's okay. We move on. But with the other male friends that I've met in uni as well as in high school and primary school, they don't have that sort of support system. When they go to their father, the dad is either not listening, or the dad is saying, okay, but talk to your mother. And then when they go to the mom is like, why are you coming to me? I won't be able to advise you the way your dad will. So I'm just seeing all of this, how the male emotion is. There's so much that men want to express, but they don't have that that support system that they have, and that is really dangerous, especially in Fiji, because it has been the root cause of a lot of social ills that we have. I just saw this morning that rape is still on the rise in Fiji. The youngest victim is 4 years old, and the youngest perpetrator was a 13-year-old boy. I saw that statistic, and I was like, wow. How far have we fallen? Especially because training comes down when you're a child. How you train a boy up will determine how he is as a man. So if that isn't available to that, imagine how that 13-year-old boy would be if he had that support system. If he was feeling sad, frustrated, or just going through things in his life. Imagine if he had parents or like just friends where he could go to and talk about it. That wouldn't have happened. But yeah, this is how I see the male specimen, the male species, expressing all the lack thereof of the emotions.
I think that also goes back to what Annie said, where people want just some sort of relief.
That's right.
And I also think that extends to things other than substance abuse. I think that also might extend to things like sex. Which is what we can talk about on this podcast. Just don't swear.
I also just wanted to add, just with that as well, because what I've noticed is with my male friends, right? If you take them out, like isolate them, you'll see a different side to them. That's when they tend to open up. They tend to be, like all touch, like they tend to open up to you. But when you put that one male in a group of males who exude the same kind of masculine energy, the same kind of, this sense of superiority complex, or just a typical male attitude, you can see him just going back into it. So maybe this is just my theory as an economics student. Just what I thought, like maybe it's this group syndrome that's going around. Maybe pack mentality. If you're in Rome, do what the Romans do, but they take it in a negative way.
And they cut off people's heads and stuff. But I think it's also because since we don't often, men aren't offered, proper support systems that are healthy, and they also don't. Well, from what I've seen, again, I'm a girl. I shouldn't have any input on this. But I think when with what you said, whenever you remove one boy out of his boy group and then he's actually really nice, I think the reason why this happens is because, again, support system. They don't have a normal support system. And so even if they were to have a big group of boys who are horrible to each other, like there's no intimacy, there's no support, it's better than, being on your own and dealing with things on your own. A big bad group of friends is better than being on your own. That's what I've just seen. And especially in the Pacific, where we are a very communal culture. We're very communal
much.
people. That's just my 2 cents. But I also do want to talk about individualism. And you did say you grew up in the UK in London.
Yeah.
So what are the difference between individualism and communalism that you've seen, just from your observation as someone who's lived in the city versus here?
Gosh.
So many things go on, because I love hearing about the differences in it.
Well, I mean, so the individualist cultures, we just don't have. My family are wonderful people, and they're, I had 2 parents growing up, and they're still together and everything else. But I have no, we Zoom once a month. That's my contact with my parents. And that's perfect. So it doesn't mean that we're not, sort of a family. That is just how we communicate.
Yeah.
So we are all just living our own adult lives,
Right.
and so there isn't that sense of strength, and so. I think that, and we have a big issue in the UK because of that with our older adults and loneliness, because the adult kids go off and live their lives, and don't really think, older adults are kind of just sat at home with no one really checking in on them regularly. And they're certainly not in necessarily a shared family home among the white English sort of families or individualist families. So I think that, that's kind of one side of it. And then obviously coming here, and families are so strong and huge. Huge families. Oh my gosh.
Everyone is related to each other.
But everyone's sort of, I mean, it's fantastic that you have such strong family ties. But I think at the same time, that means that there's a lot of obligations and expectations. So you as an individual are having to provide, in some sense, as you're serving a role within the family. That gives you a lot of extra kind of workload, which I, as an individualist, I'm just living my little life, and if I had a family, then, my immediate family, but I certainly wouldn't be expected to be providing for my own parents or my brothers and sisters. So I think that it's I mean, obviously everywhere has pros and cons.
Exactly.
But I think what's interesting about the strength of the sort of collectivism and the communal families in the Pacific is, it's both this huge support system and the source of resilience and coping. I mean, the amount of grief and loss and trauma that actually many people are able to overcome because of their family. Right. But at the same time, it's the source of the social rejection and the isolation if you are someone that doesn't fit in with your family needs or values or whatever. And then we're coming back to the kind of thing about ICE and sort of drug use. It isn't, you're not just having to feed yourself. Your role, particularly as a male, would be to provide for a large number of people as part of the family or even the community. And so losing your job has a huge impact, because it isn't just about, what am I going to do to eat tomorrow? It's actually like, I'm letting down everybody. And the impact that would have on your mental health and your sense of identity and self-worth is much greater than it might do in individualist cultures.
And so, if you don't mind me asking, did you move out after high school when you went into university?
Yes, I had done in the UK. We do gap years between school and university. So I'd gone to the States for a gap year, and then I went to a university I went back to the UK, but I was in kind of the other side of the country to go to university. Right. And then obviously, and because we had lived as a family, we'd lived in the States and everything when I was a kid. So my parents were very much like, go, leave the UK, go to the world. But I do think that living here and sort of seeing and observing other people's sort of families, it's like, I actually am missing a sense of attachment, and I have to very much depend on attachment with friends. They are my family, and that's great. Except if you're an expat, your friends leave. Their contract ends. I know. And so you don't have that very sustained sort of grounding. You're just constantly, wherever you're living, that group at the moment is your family, and then you move on to another family or whatever.
That's true.
So was this struggle for you, or is it just something that you're used to?
Well, so I think because I've grown up like that, it's not a struggle because that's, it's that idea of mindset. That is how I understand the world is meant to work for me. And it's just kind of, I can just maybe as a psychologist, I'm sort of reflecting on, the pros and cons because I'm able to observe other people's way of living and family structures. But it doesn't mean that I feel that I've missed out. I can see the pros and cons in the way that my family are structured and the way that we as individualists kind of do it. But I don't, I sort of think, I had a perfectly fine childhood. It's just a different way of being.
You know what? It's very true what you say with the lifestyle of an expat, because I did go to a school where there are lots and lots of expats. So like you said, people were moving in and out, in and out. But what I noticed at this school it was a lot more individualistically structured as compared to schools in the rest of the country. So that's very interesting. And so I sort of have a little bit of perspective from an individualist culture and then, my own actual heritage from the collectivist culture. It's really, really, I just love talking about it.
Honestly.
It's so interesting, like it opens up your views.
Yeah. But it's so, sorry, just because with sort of students and thinking about students, and one of the things, of course, is adapting to shifting and transitioning, and then homesickness. So I might quite easily be able to move countries and start fresh because, it's kind of it's just about me and whether, what I'm doing and my cats. But, whereas perhaps for students that are, Pacific students that might be now studying in Lathala and Suva, but they're originally from Tonga or Solomon or wherever, their added stress is the homesickness that comes from that transition, which maybe if, the American students that come over for junior year abroad or whatever don't sense that at all.
Love it.
Yeah.
Free from parents.
Yeah.
Let me just throw in, because I went through the same exact thing. After high school, I'd gone to Australia to study. To pursue my first bachelor's. I went to ANU in Canberra. And what I noticed was during the first year, this was 2018, by the way. First semester, I was okay, relatively okay, fine. But then second semester, and I was telling Rosie that's when it finally dawned on me that I don't have family with me anymore. And it really goes back to what you said, how here it's very much communalistic. The communal ties here, no matter how toxic, no matter how good it is, it's just there. It's just something that we grew up having. We grew up seeing families come in and they go out. Some of us even have our extended family living with us. For myself, even though I had my mom, grandma, and two sisters, I had families coming in from the village. They would stay for 2-3 months, then they'd leave, and then another family comes in. So it's just that feeling of communalism, that strong kinship ties, is what I really missed out when I was in Australia. By the way, it took me a really long time to pinpoint that's exactly what I was missing. Because when I used to call my mom, I was like, I think Australia's too hard for me. I don't understand what everyone is saying.
You didn't like.
I didn't understand.
You didn't process the you were homesick.
Yeah.
Like I'd heard about depression, anxiety, all the social ills, but I never expected that happening to me. Because generally, as a bubbly person coming from Fiji, I thought I just fit in well in Australia. But I saw the difference in culture between here and in Australia. Even with my Australian friends there, I saw how, even though they'd go back, say, a month or fortnight to their parents or to their family, even when they're away from that, they fared really well. Whether they're living in accommodations, in dormitories, they would have friends that have the strong support system there. And when I did manage to pinpoint that, I was just homesick.
But I think as well, it comes back to that idea of stress. So it's interesting that your first semester you were fine, and second semester. So first semester is everything's fun and novelty, and the workload isn't maybe as high. And then second semester is when things get real.
That's right.
And the workload gets higher and things get more serious. And so you're stressed, and it's the stress that brings out that I'm missing that foundation.
That's true.
Okay. It's one thing to sort of say overtly, who do I go and talk to? Maybe my I would have talked to my family. But it's more than that. It's that sense of just that foundation that you have that gives you a sort of Band-Aid across, that helps you to deal with stress because you feel your identity and everything is kind of settled. And so the homesickness kind of comes in because you are feeling stressed, whereas others might have other sources of coping or another sense of grounding that when they get distressed, that kind of fills them in. Because we see this a little bit with the rugby teams, the Pacific rugby teams.
Yes.
It's very important that a lot of the time they're having to, they're overseas in competitions or training. And it's very important with the Pacific teams that there are cultural traditions or a sense of identity and ways for them to feel still connected to home.
Yeah.
Because otherwise they can't perform, because otherwise they're lost. And so homesickness isn't just kind of crying because you haven't seen your mom. It's, it's kind of, it's that just sense of, lost.
You feel empty, you feel hollow.
Yeah. And identity ties back to home, like where you are from.
Yes.
Exactly.
And so I think if you've noticed, whenever I'm meeting new people and they're from Fiji, they're like, oh, where are you from? Like there's that sense of where are you from? Who are you?
That's true. Yeah.
And it tends to be where you are from. For me, it's Tonga. Like, that's very true. When I came to Fiji, even just coming from Tonga to Fiji, even though, you would assume that these two Pacific Islanders would have a lot of common, it was not. It was a really big, huge culture shock for me. Because although Fiji also has communal living and things like that, just like Tonga, it wasn't Tonga,
Yeah, that's true.
You don't have that foundation, like you said, that you don't have that support system. And Tonga and Fiji, although we have lots of cultural similarities, we also have a huge, social differences. Like
That's
the way
true.
that people interact completely different from Tonga. So that was a huge, huge thing for me when I came here. And I was just talking to my mom. I was like, Mom, why is it that when we moved to Fiji, I had such a big culture shock, but when we were living in like Australia for 1 year, it was fine? And she was like, I don't know. And I really still can't pinpoint
that's interesting.
why.
Well, but then that could be the expectation. So when you go to Australia, it's going to be totally different.
That's
and
true,
so you're
yes.
already kind of mentally prepared for that.
Yeah.
And then, like you say, Tonga to Fiji, you assumed would be the same. And so it was more subtle, the differences, and it was harder to kind of understand what was going on.
Yeah.
So it might have just been a kind of expectation.
Yeah, but that's very true about homesickness. And I just wanted to ask before because I feel like we're going to lead into a very long conversation. But was there anything that you wanted to tell us about substance abuse that you might have written down on your notes? Please feel free.
Oh, yeah.
We want to hear more.
We can talk about anything. But I think sort of one of the important things is about sort of the education and the being honest. So we sort of said earlier and sort of mentioned earlier about kind of people talking about. So one of the things also is about rape and sort of sex, and it's the same issue with young people not growing up with an understanding of relationships and sexual urges. So a 13-year-old may begin to have sexual urges and not know what's going on.
That's true.
And is influenced by what they see in the media or whatever, as opposed to being able to talk to someone and say, I don't understand what I'm doing. I don't understand what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
And it's the same with drugs, to sort of say, oh, I did this thing and I have no one to kind of talk to about it. And so I think, what's really important is that trustworthy, honest information. And we sort of said at the beginning, young people are, teenagers are going to probably take drugs. Some teenagers, not all, but some of them. Yeah, they're going to be teens. They're going to be curious. They're going to try different things, and some of the, and they're going to try risk taking, and that's important in terms of our evolution. It's important that we have an age group who just are curious about life and try different things, and get involved in different things. And so what we've seen time and again throughout sort of the history in lots of different countries is the idea of just trying to get teenagers to not take drugs or not do sex or do whatever. It's never going to work. This is not possible. You cannot stop not every teenager, but you can't stop at least some doing something. And by making things banned or illegal or just saying, you're just not supposed to do it blindly, all you do is make it go underground. And so no one's talking about what they're doing. No, I had a bad, not me personally, but someone thinking I took this drug and it was a terrible experience, but I can't even talk to someone about that and what I went through.
Yeah.
And so I've got no way of working out what happened. And so the really important thing is trustworthy. So for example, in the UK in the early 2000s, they had, instead of the just say no, which is the American thing that has absolutely not worked in years and years, it's fundamentally not worked.
Because of the word just.
Just say no. It's like, oh, that's easy. When I lived in the 80s, we lived in Texas, and there was this commercial on TV, the anti-drugs commercial, and it was this like burly sort of guy, and he was like, and he showed an egg. this is your
This
brain.
is your brain on drugs.
This is your brain on drugs. We fry the egg.
Yeah.
It's like, any questions? And you're like, yes, lots of questions.
What does this mean?
Yeah.
Is my
Symbolism of an egg.
It was just the most ridiculous thing.
I've heard that, yeah, like this is your brain. This is your brain on drugs. And then it's like he puts it in a frying
Yeah.
pan.
And, and like zero information
Yeah.
about anything else.
What chicken's egg?
What a waste of an egg.
And so then in the early 2000s, the UK government implemented a campaign specifically targeted at young teenagers called Talk to Frank. And Frank is the word for like being honest in English. So it was sort of a helpline, and it was a series of ads that were like, you can ask us anything about the drugs and we will tell you the facts. You know, we will tell you, yeah, it's going to be fun. You know, if you take ecstasy, there's going to be a period of the time where it's like, great. And then this is going to happen. Or, you know, we're just going to give you factual information. And it's not that this Talk to Frank campaign necessarily had a direct reduction in drug use, but what it did was make teenagers feel that they had a trustworthy source of information, that they could kind of say, look, I'm thinking about my friends are all taking this new thing and I'm thinking about doing it. What should I, you know, what is it? And they would get some real information, and then they could make their own health decisions. And I think that's where we need to be going, is trusting that young people don't want to be junkies on the street. That's not a life
true.
goal. You know, no one wants to be that. You know, they're making decisions, and they do want their lives to be the best life it can be. And so if you give them factual information, they will make decisions that are good for them at the time. And so it's about trying to be more about education and harm reduction, as opposed to the simple blanket, it's not going to work, just don't take it, abstinence.
I think that nicely wraps up our conversation that we had today. Thank you to our listeners. Thank you so much, Annie, for coming.
Thank you. My
Thank
pleasure.
you so much.
Honestly.
And you were just listening to My Lair, only on Radio Pacific 89.4 FM. Love your culture. Please be sure to tune in next week. Bye-bye.
And also, before we leave, make sure to follow us on our social media on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook.
Would you like to say something?
No, that's all good.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Goodbye. Sorry. I just don't want the conversation to end.
I know. We can talk off mic.
Yeah.
But okay, right. I was Rosinda.
I'm Manoa.
And I'm still Annie.
Thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye.